Okay, good evening. Welcome to our Shar Yichud Ve'emunah classes series. We're beginning with the introduction. And this book really is the second book of Tanya, of the first Lubavitcher Rebbe's magnus opus called Tanya. And Tanya consists of 5 books, but this is book number 2. Originally, it was meant to be book number 1, but the Alter Rebbe switched the order because the goal of Tanya really was to initially to impart his system of serving God. And even you'll see from the introduction here, what he has over here is really about even this book Shar Yichud Ve'emunah, which is about the oneness of God, really ultimately is present in order, has a place in serving, as having a place in serving God. So it really ties into the system of book number 1 in Tanya, because it's also really a book about serving God, despite the fact that it goes off on philosophical and mystical notions about the oneness of God. You follow so far?
Yeah.
Good. Very good. Now I also see it privately as book number 2 of a different book.
Right.
I see it privately as book number 2 of Shar HaYichud, almost the same name, not called Shar Yichud, Shar Yichud of Rabbeinu Bachya ibn Pekuda, which was written somewhere in the 900s. He was very little is known of him. He was a rabbi in medieval Spain during the time when Spain was under Islamic rule, when it was called Al-Andalus, and he had written a fantastic work on Musar. He didn't think he wrote a book on Musar. He thought he wrote a book on Halacha. He calls the book is called Chayvais Halavavos, or modern Hebrew or Svardik Hebrew Chovot Halavavot, duties of the heart. And he was not, you could tell from his introduction that he was never intended this to be thought of as a book of Musar. He saw it as simple halacha, like there are halachas, laws that have to do with how we conduct our body. It's like we put tefillin on our body, we make brachas with food that we put into our body, we visit the sick with our body, we give tzedakah with our body, like the things that have the chayves haguf, obligations of the body. So too there's chovot halavavot, obligations of the heart. And he goes through many different sections in this book. We won't call them chapters, sections on different themes. And the first of the sections is on the oneness of God. That's the first section. He calls that Shar HaYichud. Then of course there are other sha'arim, other sections, Shar HaBechina, the gate of introspection, Shar Bitochen, the gate of trust, Shar Ahava, the gate of love. So Shar HaYichud of Rabbeinu Bachya ibn Pekuda, I think of as really the first section of Shar Yichud Ve'emunah of the Alter Rebbe, of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. I think what he did was, because he doesn't repeat the material of Shar Yichud of Rabbeinu Bachya ibn Pekuda, but it does form the backbone of everything that he says. It forms the philosophical foundation for everything he's going to say. And you sort of have to in some way go back to what Rabbeinu Bachya said, even if you're not aware that you're doing that. But in explaining Tanya, somewhere you have to come back to what the main idea of Rabbeinu Bachya in order to understand Shar Yichud Ve'emunah. So tonight I wanted to deal a little bit with the main idea of Rabbeinu Bachya. It's very interesting. There were some who did not like learning Shar Yichud of Chovot HaLevavot. And, for a while I was wondering. Then when I was learning Kuzari in English, the new Feldheim edition, they have a footnote in the introduction where they happen to explain, the objection. The objection, it seems, comes from the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon didn't want so much exposure to Greek philosophy, and in its place, he suggested that people study instead Kuzari from Rabbeinu Yehuda Halevi. So we study Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's Kuzari instead of Rabbeinu Bachya's Shar Yichud. I was kind of wondering for a while, like, what's the connection? I mean, I understand that you might say from a perspective of someone who's a purist of faith and feels that Greek philosophy impinges on Jewish faith, that and maybe Greek, it's questionable if you should bring Greek philosophy into Judaism, that you'd want to go with a book, study philosophy book instead, that's not based on Greek philosophy, because the truth is that what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi managed to do was write the philosophy book. That's what he managed to do. In other words, he's going against Greek philosophy, but at the same time, he's showing that Judaism internally has a strong logical thought process that doesn't that you don't have to come on to Greek philosophy.
Right.
So what happened? So I was learning Kuzari, and I was like wondering how is this a substitute for that? Where in Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's book does he discuss at least the main core idea that's in Shar Yichud of Rabbeinu Bachya and Pekuda? And just the other day I came across the place. And I knew it already, and the truth of the matter is I still think that it's probably written that, let's put it this way. We all know that as the generations go on, Torah has to be explained more explicitly. Things that were understood by hints in earlier generations now need fuller explanation. So even though I think Rabbi Yehuda Halevi really did explain it well, but he explained it well for someone who kind of, as they say, could read, can pull out of a few terse lines a tremendous array of topics.
Yeah.
You understand?
Yes.
You can tease out much more than what is overtly written there. But so for the Vilna Gaon and those who were in his generation, I think that was good enough. But I may say, I still don't think it's a substitute for learning Shar Yichud of Rabbeinu Bachya. I think that it has its own unique charm. And truth be told, we are in a generation where people are studying things that are a lot more corrosive to Torah than the little bit of Greek philosophy that's in Shar Yichud. So they might as well learn Shar Yichud.
Is there another concern in that Shar HaYichud from Rabachia kind of offers a logical explanation or proof of God's unity and existence. And once you start trying to prove things in a logical, in a logical fashion, there is always room to question that logic.
Yeah, that's probably there is, but you could say the same for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi as well.
Uh-huh. And and it's interesting. I have something that I found online where somebody where I don't remember. I have to look at the. I have it saved on my computer. And somebody's questioning one of Rabachia's, I think, or something from his Shar Yichud.
Okay.
He's questioning it, but it's very scientific. I do not understand. He's saying what Rabachia is saying doesn't make sense for this scientific reasoning, and I have no idea what he's talking about. Maybe I could show it to you sometime. But
Okay. I
that
mean, all
that
he
just
really
goes.
does is in his logical proof, he shows that everything has to come from one source.
Yeah,
But if you and once you accept everything has to come from one source,
yeah,
then we have to talk about what real oneness
right,
means.
yeah. But there's
So
always going to be this. There's always going to be this. No matter how logically you can prove something, there's always going to be at the very end. There's still going to be this leap of faith that you're going to have to take. I think, at least that's what I feel. I mean, you can prove
right,
something very well, but you never can. You can't. I don't feel you can prove God's. You can ultimately prove God's existence. You can
right.
have very logical things that point to God's existence. That seems very logical that God exists, but in the end, you're going to still have to take that last leap of faith and say, yes, I will accept that God exists. And,
I agree with you. However, you don't see any evidence of that kind of concern in the way Rabbeinu Bachya writes Shar Yichud.
mhm.
Now listen, Judaism is not monolithic,
Yeah,
and I'm talking about Torah or Orthodox Judaism. It's not monolithic, and we had different cultural understandings at different times and in different places.
right.
So it's for what for he didn't he seemed to feel that this is rock solid
Rock
what he
solid.
said,
Yeah.
and he seemed to feel that it's part of kihi chochmaskim binaskim einei amim. It's your wisdom and your understanding in the eyes of the nations. He felt embarrassed almost by a Judaism that can't speak logically
Mm-hmm.
and cannot express itself on tight, very very how I say, have your how they call it again. There's someone who runs a tight ship,
Yeah.
so the logic should be like a tight ship where
Yeah.
you can't budget.
Yeah. Budget. Yeah.
You know, um, he felt that this was part of this is kihi chochmaschem v'inaschem b'einei ha'amim. He says that in his introduction. So so I wanted to get tonight to his core point. It's obviously not a substitute for what his whole lead up to his core point, and but I do admit that his core point is mentioned in Kuzari, and it has brief mention in and it has brief mention in not only in also in at the very beginning of Derech Hashem. There's like a line or two where it mentions it as well. And the idea simply is when we say God is one, what we mean is that he is not multiple. You follow? In other words, we're not making a positive statement about God, saying that he is one. What we're really saying is God is not multiple. And why how do we get to that? So I would say, I'm not going to the whole lead up, but a close enough lead in would be that you work with the idea that God is perfect, which, by the way, is something that Ramchal always uses. So, someone like the Vilna Gaon wouldn't be upset with someone saying, someone saying that. So, because he was a big fan of the Ramchal.
Yes, definitely.
So you start off by saying God is perfect. Then what you do is you say, okay, if God is perfect, then his oneness must also be perfect. You follow so far?
Yeah.
When we say Hashem Echad, that oneness has to also be perfect. So let's now talk about what means that oneness is perfect. Well, let's look around us in our world, and you'll notice that anything that is that we think of as one is really made up of components. It's not seamless. It's made up of parts. So far, you follow?
Yep.
Okay, so something that is component, made up of parts, would you say that it's really one, or would you say it's borrowing the term one?
It's borrowing it.
It's borrowing, right? It's calling it one. It is a shem hamushal. It's a borrowed term. So we have to say that God's oneness, to be perfect, cannot be made up of parts. So unlike human beings, who are made up of, you have different body parts. Each body part has different tissues. Each tissues have cells. Cells have subcellular components, ribosomes, lysosomes, protoplasm, all mitochondria, cell wall, and on and on and on. Each of those are made up of organic molecules. Organic molecules break down further into atoms, atoms into subatomic particles, such as the most famous and most general of them, electron, neutron, and proton. Each electron, neutron, proton, we're told, are made up of quarks, and so on and so forth, until we get maybe a smear of energy that itself has a beginning, middle, and end. And that beginning, middle, end has its own beginning, middle, and end, or maybe merges into something bigger than itself that has its own beginning, middle, and end. And this is how it goes. Angels, for their level, also have parts. And something that can be measured, beginning, middle, and end. That is, that item is a part. Okay.
I think we mentioned last time that, or we mentioned before, that doesn't necessarily have to be a physical beginning, middle, and end. It could be just a time, or a spiritual, or
Sure.
some kind of, to have to be considered to be parts.
Exactly. It could be, it could be a spiritual beginning, middle, and end. It could be now anything. Now he brings out also, like you mentioned, anything that's limited in space, because it already has a limit, a defined limit, must perforce also be limited in time, meaning it can't exist forever.
Our time.
Even a spiritual time, it can't exist forever. It might seem forever relative to physical time, but in its own realm, it's not forever.
The only thing that's forever is Hashem.
Right. This is why the soul is constantly going up levels and levels on the yard site. Right? You can't stay in that the low level forever. Can't exist there forever. The only thing that's forever is Hashem, right? And that we don't, and even to use the term forever really just means, which means it implies time, when is a little bit of a borrowed term because we're talking about a being who's beyond time, who created time.
You're saying that the time that he created for us, there is also a spiritual type of time,
Yeah, there has to be.
which we can't understand what that is, but because we
The
don't.
closest we could get to is, as Rav Ashlag said, is understanding that it works, is that it's cause and effect sequence.
Okay.
So as we're talking about this, so because God is a I don't know what to say, is an existence that beingness that has absolutely no parts. We call that in fancy English, he's a non-composite unity. Emphasis on the non-part, non-composite unity. Or I like the term seamless oneness.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, seamless oneness. Yeah.
So therefore, his oneness is pure. Now, as I think we discussed in a couple of classes ago, if you have a being whose oneness is pure like that, then what else can we say about this being? Well, no parts means no beginning, middle, or end either. So that by saying God is one, we're also saying he's infinite. Yeah. And again, the word infinite is a what we call a term of negation, because we're not saying who God is, we're saying who he's not. He's not finite, infinite, not finite.
Now, there's different types of infinite, though.
So that we mean the absolute infinity.
Absolute infinite, okay.
Again, not infinity in the borrowed sense, just like the different kinds of oneness, the different kinds of infinity. But right. Those are all borrowed terms because anything that's not God will turn out to be finite in some way.
In some way, yeah.
It's a relative infinity as opposed to an absolute infinity.
Right. So even let's say, let's take, for example, the concept that numbers are infinite.
Right. So, but again, it's limited to being numbers.
You're saying it's limited in the sense that
it's only going on one vector, numbers.
Numbers. But God
much more than numbers. Numbers is a mathematical construct.
Yeah.
God, who created that mathematical construct? Think about that. So, and that actually does bring questions to even saying God is one, saying that he's not multiple, it brings questions to it because it's, because the idea of oneness is also a mathematical construct. And that's maybe what alludes to what you were talking about earlier, with where's the leap beyond logic? Excuse me. I would think that the leap beyond logic may be expressed in the language of Sefer Yetzirah, where it says, "Before one, what do you count?" It's meant as a cone, almost like a Zen cone. Before one, what do you count? Doesn't mean it mathematically. It means it to take you out of your mathematical conceptions, take you to nothingness. You see, we don't mean zero. We don't mean negative one when we say before one. We mean really beyond conception of any numbers. What do you count? And God, having created mathematics, has to be beyond conception of numbers.
This is why the Rambam was such a into using negation of when we're talking about God, right?
Right. And there's some who, like I said, there's some who argue that, like you said earlier, and this is what you leveled to me against Rabbeinu Bachya, and I'm saying Rabbeinu Bachya wasn't bothered by that, probably based on the way he wrote.
Yeah,
I don't know personally, but based on the way he wrote.
yeah,
But the idea is that beyond, that there are some who, and I've been doing research and been talking with people who are learning these materials, that apparently there was an objection leveled against even talking about God in negative terms, because even negative terms is some sort of conception. Even in terms of negation, derech shlila
yeah,
is some sort of conception, and I mean, even if it's an indirect conception, some sort of conception, and how dare a human being have any conception,
yeah.
claim any conception?
It almost becomes hard for a human because you want to feel connected to God, but if you feel that there's no way to even talk about Him, then it kind of challenges you to feel
Right.
any connection with Him. So that makes it.
So what I do is I do a compromise for myself.
Yeah.
I say like this: in essence, those who say talking about him even by way of negation are right. I mean, that they say you shouldn't do it, saying that how dare a human being speak about God even by way of negation. I believe in essence they are right. We have no conception. It's like Alter Rebbe is an example of, if you try touching a thought with your hand, people will laugh at you. Say, how do you grasp a thought with your hand? You say, oh, I grasp the thought of my hand. Hand is not a tool for grasping thought. So no tool has ever been created to grasp God. Even if you look at when Shlomo Melech built the Beit HaMikdash, it says this will be the house for your name. It never says for God himself, for your name. So we don't have any tools for grasping God. And I believe in essence that those who say that we cannot even grasp by way of negation are correct. However, what I do say is that I take a compromise approach. Rabbeinu Bachya is showing us the closest the human mind can get to there. And after that, like you said, it's a leap of faith. We don't know. And if God didn't want us to take that logical route to explore his oneness, then what is it that we are claiming we believe in? What is it that he asked us to believe in? Obviously, he wanted us to use our mind to the extent that our mind will go. And I believe that Rabbeinu Bachya takes it to the edge, that it can go. From that point on, you say, okay, this is as far as my mind can go with this. This is the arrow, so to speak, that points in the direction. But obviously the mind is not meant to go fully there. You hear me, Adam?
Yes.
Okay. Do you hear me, Batya?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the way I understand it. So if you understand that we're talking here, what we mean when we talk about God being one, and what we talk about mean God being infinite, and we understand that really it's the same thing, being one and being infinite is the same thing by God, then with that background, we're ready to go into the Alter Rebbe's Shar Yichud Ve'emunah. Now, what the Alter Rebbe does is, since I think we only have a few more minutes, so I'm not going to go into the text itself, but Rabbeinu Bachya teaches us what monotheism is in Judaism. teaches us what monotheism is. What the Alter Rebbe does is he teaches us what monism is.
Monism.
Yeah, yeah. Monism is a specialized form of monotheism. It's
Really?
a yeah. It takes the idea that God is one and expands it to say God is everything and more than everything. There's nothing outside of God.
It- some
He's
is
the only existence.
some people refer to that as acosmism. Is that correct?
I never heard that term before. If you could share with me material on that, I'd love it.
Okay, I think I saw that maybe in Norman Lamb's book on Hasidism, I think. But I'll have to see if I can find that. Yeah.
Okay, I'd love to see that. But it comes really what it comes down to is that we only that there is only God, and everything else I wouldn't say is a dream character, but I would say is you know I mean everything is real, but the the feeling that everything has that it's separate from God is an illusion. Not the thing. It's not the beings themselves. Only their feelings that they're separate from God. That's an illusion. So we'll go into this, and we'll discuss. And this is going to be really the central kernel of the whole Sha'ar Yichud Ve'emunah. Ultimately comes down to that Einoid Milvadoi, there's nothing other than God. God's the only existence. So where Rabbeinu Bachya hands off to the Alter Rebbe is as follows. Rabbeinu Bachya teaches monotheism, and the Alter Rebbe takes where Rabbeinu Bachya left off and into the realm of monism. So to be, let's say, a good Orthodox Jew, and to have the correct belief of God in the most traditional sense, Rabbeinu Bachya is enough. It takes you to explain what monotheism is. But if you want to take it further to into a mystical conception that personally bears on your life, you have to explore monism and the implications of monism. Because everything I told you is nice, but there also comes with implications for our lives.
Yeah.
It's not simply, okay, there's nothing but God. Okay, but what does that imply for me? What does that imply for how I'm supposed to view the world? What does that imply for my relationship with people? What does that imply for Torah and mitzvahs? What does that imply for the days of Mashiach? What does that imply for the days before Mashiach?
Yeah.
So, how does some of the horrors that we saw in humanity occur in the midst of God's oneness and onlyness? I mean, these are the real questions that you have to grapple with as you're learning what monism is.
Monism.
Yeah.
Spatula likes that word.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
I never heard it until today.
Hey, it's an English word. It's not in the, and I have to point out to you that the fact that there is an English word for it teaches you that there wasn't only Jewish people who ever thought of the idea.
Right.
I mean, there are philosophers through the world who have thought of this idea, ranging from India to the Muslim world. However, there's a Jewish brand of the idea as well. That's what we're learning. If you listen to some of the other cultures and other great thinkers of the world who are very into this idea, you'll see lots of parallels, and you'll have to admit that these were people who fulfilled their mitzvah of believing in one God in a very enhanced way. As because the children of Noach also have this mitzvah, but we're learning here specifically the Jewish branch of it and its implications for Jewish life as well.
Right.
So with that, God willing, Lina der Mirz Hashem next week. I hope to do the introduction of Shar Yichud Ve'emunah, and thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure, my pleasure. Okay, have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
And Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Hope to
Shabbat
see.
shalom.
And nobody go out tomorrow night, Halloween, not a good night to be out.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Well, to Shul, we'll be home pretty soon, early in the night. We'll be okay. Okay. All right. Have a good night.
Good night.
להתראות.
Good night.
Good night.